Here's a word that swallowed a whole sentence. Ampersand. Say it slowly. It sounds ancient, maybe French, maybe Greek, but the truth is stranger than that. It is just a bunch of schoolchildren hundreds of years ago mumbling Latin so fast that the phrase collapsed into a single blob of sound, and that blob became a word we still use today. That is the story we're telling. To understand how Ampersand happened, you need to go back to ancient Rome. Specifically, to the walls of Pompeii, buried under volcanic ash in 79 AD and preserved almost perfectly, graffiti and all. Roman writers had a problem. Latin is a dense language. Writing everything out by hand in full took time. So scribes and ordinary people developed shorthand systems, quick symbols that stood in for common words. One of the most common words in any language is and. In Latin, that word is et, 2 letters. Simple enough. But when you are writing fast, even 2 letters feel like too many. So someone, somewhere, started writing E and T together in one quick stroke. A ligature. The letters fused. Over centuries of handwriting, that fused shape drifted and simplified until it barely looked like letters at all. It looked like this. And or. That symbol on your keyboard, the one you probably type without a second thought, is a squashed, stylized version of the Latin word etei. You can still see it if you look at certain elegant ampersand fonts, the E on the left curling into the T on the right. This is not speculation. We can see early versions of this ligature in Pompeiian graffiti scratched into walls before the eruption. Ordinary Romans were using compressed eta symbols in casual writing nearly 2,000 years ago. Origin story. Now, the symbol has a long history. The word ampersand is much younger. Its earliest recorded use is from the 1880s. But to understand how it got coined, you have to understand how children learned to read and write in the centuries before that. In medieval and early modern Europe, literacy was taught largely through the alphabet recited aloud. Children did not just learn letters silently, they chanted them, and the alphabet they chanted did not stop at Z. Here's the thing that surprises most people. For a long time, the ND symbol was taught as the 27th letter of the English alphabet. It came at the end, after Z. And when you are teaching the alphabet as a recitation, you need a way to distinguish letters that are also words. The letter A, for example, is also the English article a, and the letter I is also the pronoun I. So teachers used a Latin phrase to clarify per se, meaning by itself, or in itself. If a letter was also a word on its own, you announced it as a per se a, meaning the letter A, which by itself means A. Now apply that logic to and. The symbol and by itself means and. So when children recited the end of the alphabet, they would say X, Y, Z, and per se and. That last phrase, and per se and, means and, which by itself means and. It is a grammatical footnote tacked onto the end of the alphabet. Perfectly logical, if a little clunky. The problem is that children are not interested in grammatical footnotes. They're interested in getting to the end of the alphabet as fast as possible. So, and per se, and became and per se, and became and pers and became ampersand. The phrase ate itself. 3 words and a symbol compressed into one noun. The Latin qualifier per se dissolved into the surrounding sounds. The and at the beginning merged with per and lost its identity. The whole thing slurred, hardened, and by the time anyone thought to write it down, it was already a single word that nobody recognized as a phrase anymore. The 1880s attestation is our earliest written record, but the word was almost certainly spoken for decades or even centuries before someone bothered to record it. Schoolchildren were reciting alphabets with and at the end from at least the 16th century onward, in England and then in the American colonies. People like the printer Richard Mulcaster, who published an influential spelling guide in 1582, helped standardize how the alphabet was taught, and the and symbol appears in alphabet lists from this period. The oral tradition of chanting and per se and would have run alongside that written tradition the whole time. So by the time someone wrote ampersand in the 1880s, the word had probably been knocking around in spoken English for 200 years or more. It just took that long for it to seem worth writing down. The misconception. Here is where a very common error comes in. You will sometimes read that the and symbol comes from the Tironian Notes, a shorthand system attributed to Tiro, the secretary of the Roman statesman Cicero, working in the 1st century BC. The Tironian Notes were a real system used by scribes for centuries. And the Tironian system did have a symbol for et, but that symbol was not, and stai. It looked more like a reversed capital gamma, a different shape entirely. The Tironian ET symbol was used by some medieval scribes, and it hung around in Irish manuscripts and certain European traditions for quite a while. But it is a separate lineage from the symbol we call and and Usukisarj comes from the Roman ligature tradition, the fused de and t visible in Pompeiian graffiti, not from Tiro's secretarial shorthand. The two systems got conflated somewhere along the way, probably because both were associated with Roman writing and both involved shorthand for eet, but they are distinct. The and keet baman and on your keyboard is a direct descendant of a squashed Latin ligature, not a Tironian symbol. Modern echoes, the and symbol is everywhere today, and most of the time we use it without thinking about its Latin origins. Company names, law firm signs, band names, Simon and Garfunkel, Dolce and Gabbana, Barnes and Noble. In these contexts, it functions as a visual shorthand, a quick, elegant connector between two things that belong together. But the Latin root et keeps surfacing in unexpected places. The word etc., almost always abbreviated as etc., is just et plus cetera, meaning and the rest. Every time you type etc., you are using the same Latin et that became and. And in some older typographic traditions, etc. was sometimes written with and as a substitute and c. You will still see that in historical documents and formal British writing. The et key root also shows up in French, where et still just means and, pronounced like the English letter a. Slurred. Modern French carried it unchanged from Latin, which means that when an English speaker reads a French menu and sees poulet et frites, they are looking at the same word that Roman scribes in Pompeii were squashing into a ligature 2,000 years ago. Deeper connections. What the Ampersand story reveals is something broader about how language actually changes. We tend to imagine that words have clean origins, deliberate coinages, a moment of invention. But ampersand is the opposite of that. Nobody invented it. It eroded into existence. A Latin phrase worn smooth by thousands of repetitions in schoolrooms across centuries, until the original meaning was completely buried and what remained was just a convenient sound. This kind of change has a name in linguistics: phonetic erosion, or sometimes slurring, though linguists prefer the term reduction. Sounds that appear frequently in fast, casual speech get compressed. Syllables disappear. Consonants blur together. And per se, and is an extreme case because the erosion destroyed not just sounds, but meaning. The phrase was describing something, and the description collapsed into the thing it was describing. The word for and became essentially and. There's a family of words that formed this way. Goodbye is a compression of God.